Well, good afternoon. Thanks for taking time out. As I think it goes without saying, this is not the format we initially envisioned this summit taking when we conceptualized it probably as long ago as last summer. We appreciate you taking time out, despite the fact that we're not in the place like the Wisconsin room, sharing food, being together in the same space. We're planning to try to keep this as engaging as possible, despite the ability or the lack of ability for us to break off into small groups and have good discussions. We've got some questions. We're hoping to be able to open up some space to get some engagement. Thanks in advance for those of you keeping mics off and cameras off to keep the flow of our time together as smooth as possible. And then when we have time for discussion, feel free to jump in. Also, feel free to use the chat at this point. And Brenner and I are going to try to do our best to follow along. So thanks so much in advance for our time. And let's get right into some kind of key outcomes of our time together. First and foremost, we're hoping that you walk away feeling like you've got some more information around our collective accomplishments this past year. We're wanting to do a little bit of reflection on the things that we've been able to accomplish, talk a little bit about configuration and practice that collects the present, and then also think about plans and initiatives in development for this coming year and getting your insight and feedback on that. A particular note about the second bullet point and things that have changed essentially kind of in the last year. A lot of the work of us together in this space involves stakeholders from a variety of different practices. And one of the things that's becoming more increasingly clear is that while we try to look at things like building consensus and communities of practice locally, it's really clear to us now that we also need to think about communities of practice outside our own campus confines. And now that the university system is onboarding Navigate on all the campuses in various degrees of completion at this point, Brennan and I and others on campus are being asked to think about how we can be mindful of other UW system campuses' needs in the way that we think about configuration and practice of the platform. So speaking of reflection in the last year, and what we wanted to share what we feel are some kind of key results and metrics of our efforts, some process accomplishments, and then you're clearly involved in some of the summer efforts that are in that lower right-hand corner. As we think about our continued efforts to try to get faculty participation and buy-in with progress reports in particular, that then feeds our outreach to students who may be struggling. We created a video tutorial for faculty that at this point has seen some good traction with over 800 views. We have looked at point-in-time comparisons of our fall progress report campaigns, and we had 850 instructors participate this past fall and submitting over 47,000 alerts, which is up about 20% point in time from fall of 18. As we think about metrics for the spring, we don't really have a point in time comparison for obvious reasons, but we feel really good about the fact that when we launched a new progress report campaign right around the time that we took the extended spring break and moved to emergency remote instruction, that new progress report resulted in 1,500 alerts and ultimately good outreach to students as a result of that. We turned on text messaging, as you are all aware, in January and have reached over 14,000 students on campus via those efforts. The persistence action team rolled out right around the time that we had to leave campus, and we strategized outreach to students who were essentially kind of some of our most at-risk students, and 235 of those students were part of that persistence action team outreach effort. One of the things we're going to talk about later today is the mobile app and our efforts to relaunch that, with first-year students kind of being the key audience this iteration. Thus far, where we are in the summer, we've got over 800 downloads from first-year students, and that's about 30% of our students who have made their way through orientation at this point. Process accomplishments, many of you are involved in good conversations we had in the fall where we kind of conducted an environmental scan or a SWOT analysis, trying to understand what were challenges across schools and colleges and units. What were you needing from the platform that you weren't getting? How are you communicating to students via campaigns, and at what point in time of the year was that happening? We've got our CGS family members on board as well over the course of the year, and advisor training and outreach related to that. Brennan and I continue to offer weekly office hours on Wednesdays at noon via Zoom to faculty and staff as configuration questions, use questions come up over the course of the academic year. We've refreshed the Navigate microsite that we'll refer to later with additional content for faculty, again, trying to drive the importance of progress reports to faculty spaces has been one of the key takeaways this year. We've also captured progress report workflow to help folks demystify, when I submit a progress report, where does it go and who's responding to these things, so that we can clearly understand where lines of demarcation are related to practice. And we've obviously deployed text messaging for advisor use with commonly understood expectations of practice there as well. Right now, we are unveiling the mobile app communication plan. You're currently involved in the Navigate User Summit, and we're going to talk a little bit about faculty appointment scheduling and how we can further pull faculty engagement into the platform. As we think about some of the ways we can measure success, this is one of the branded EAB slides that many of you are likely aware of. We took a look at fall 19 progress report efforts, and we had over 3,600 students who were identified at risk as a result of a progress report submission in the fall. And as we think about outreach to those students, once we receive the progress report, that student that took an additional step to reach out or connect with an advisor saw a marked increase in retention. You can see a 5.4% increase in the persistence rates from fall to spring for students that reached out to an advisor versus those that did not. As you are familiar with EAB's presentation, they like to conceptualize a little bit of a causal relationship, particularly as it relates to tuition revenue that's brought in as a result of these outreach, and I offer that there for you as well. This is maybe just a reminder that you all have access to a document we call the Navigate Manager. This is a document that lives on our Navigate SharePoint site and is the place that we've got up-to-date content on ongoing discussions and efforts, things that you've had a significant role in developing and fostering and moving us forward on. Results of the environmental scan from school, college, and unit conversations that we had in the fall. Understanding how you are all using appointment campaigns across your units and at what time of the year you are doing so. There's the action plan that Brennan and I conceptualized late last summer. We were doing well in fall, and then as you can imagine, many of those plans got altered pretty significantly in the spring, but we're continuing to use that to help guide our efforts. The progress report workflow I referred back to is in this space. We also are being mindful of trying to track our asks of EAB. When we hear from you about things that you want in terms of enhancements to the platform, we're capturing that in a place. We're trying to continue to supply gentle pressure as needed with our EAB reps so we can get those things into the platform, having that functionality that you really are hoping for. Texting guidelines and practices are there, as we referred to, and the structure for the app build and the progress related to that are also in the Navigate Manager. I'm going to pause at this point and see if there are questions that have kind of come in as we move through takeaways and impact and migrate towards more configuration conversations. All right, I will continue on then. Let's talk a bit about notes. And as a reminder, because folks have varying degrees of familiarity with the platform at this point, a little bit of an overview of the interrelationship of appointment reports and notes. So just a reminder that both of these are part of a student's academic record. So they're subject to FERPA regulations and accessible in some cases to students' open record requests or subpoenas. So just bearing that in mind as we think about privacy and as we make decisions to put content into the platform. Appointment reports document content related to an advising or coaching appointment, so the actual appointment itself, while notes can be used outside an appointment setting. Could reflect an email conversation that you've had, could have reflected a quick Teams conversation you've had, or as we think about a hopeful future, something face-to-face that a student may have shared with you. The notes are designed to leave content that doesn't that represents direct communication with the student. So helpful content that's consumable by more than just yourself. Advisors, faculty, and staff members across campus who might find utility of this. You always have the option of making a note visible or not to a student. And as we talk more and more about how the user base continues to grow and the way that we use content in Navigate continues to grow, notes play a really important role in that as we talk about efforts like the persistence action team that we deployed for the first time this spring. Going in and seeing up-to-the-date information via notes for a student based on recent contact you might have had with them is a really important data point in considering what an outreach plan might be for a particular student. The do's of notes and the don'ts of notes. So among the things to consider is briefly summarizing information that's available for others. So something like students shared that they're considering stopping out for the fall 20 semester. Making sure things are fact-based and academic related notes, like how they're struggling in a particular class or reconsidering a major. Using general or coded language concerning sensitive material. So discussing a difficult situation and seeking support from a campus office might be one of the ways to do that, as opposed to specifically adding content into a note with details about that tough conversation you may have had with a student. Record referrals, or I'm sorry, referrals made and resources shared with a student. Have you encouraged them to reach out to financial aid or constructed a referral for them to get their questions answered about FAFSA? And include notes about positive student behaviors. Something along the lines like maybe they sought tutoring for 2 of the courses that they're struggling in. Brennan and I continue to try to help push this reconceptualization of Navigate as not just a place where we deal with students who are struggling, but a place that we can trumpet their successes when they are doing well. So as we think about progress reports, it's not just about intervening if they're struggling, it's also reinforcing positive behaviors that we're seeing from students in and around the classroom. We should be thinking that as well as we think about note spaces. As we submit content. things to think about in terms of the don'ts of notes. Brevity is really important. Putting a ton of detail related to a conversation or information that you might have about that student is not necessarily a best practice. Trying to maybe inject a little bit of humor with some of the examples on the right, but keeping things brief for sake of multiple audiences and keeping the focus really on the student and their academic success or co-curricular success. Reporting problems with specific instructors, we should be staying away from that in terms of notes. Feedback that we get from students in this way can be addressed outside the platform. Using acronyms, students and other campus support staff might not understand because our user base is wide and their vantage points are equally so. I offer a School of Education example of acronyms running amok. Don't include in speculation, subjective opinions or judgments in this space. Any read that you might have on a student that's not necessarily fact-based. We also wanted to talk and get your feedback on existing note reasons that are in the platform. So what you see on your screen now are the list of note reasons available. As we think through and talk about this for a couple minutes, I wanted to also reiterate that you can submit a note for a student without assigning a reason to that. But for certain times, as we think about looking behind the scenes and generating reports on what type of notes are being used and at what frequency, you might notice down towards the bottom there, we have 3 new note reasons that relate a lot to our life now that COVID has come to town. So not returning temporary, not returning transfer, and not returning no plans for return have come from conversations we've been having across campus about outreach to students to keep them engaged and re-enrolled and coming back to us. And then how can we kind of quickly capture students who are reporting to us that they might be making alternate plans so that they then don't get included in those outreach efforts. I'm going to pause there and see how folks can respond to the question at the bottom there. Are there other note reasons that you think would be helpful based on your respective vantage points? Okay, I will go back to Sharon and then we'll hope Brennan can help me along on the chat as when I'm sharing screen. I'm unable to kind of see the chat. There's the list. Brennan, anything emergent from the chat? Or folks want to use their mics?
I'll do mine if that works easier. So I'm Laura in LNS Advising. So like if I'm having a meeting with a student and they tell me that they're planning to, take a semester off or they're transferring or whatever. So obviously then there's an appointment note that I make, but then do I also need to make an additional note to be able to list one of those reasons, or could any of those be tied to the appointment notes as well so we wouldn't have to do 2 separate ones?
Yeah, I think either option could work. One of the things we'll talk about in a moment with appointment reports is that the summary piece that goes into an appointment report can look and feel the very same way that a note does. Mm-hmm. So the note has emerged, and particularly these 3 not returning reasons have emerged as a quick way outside of an appointment that you might want to note that a student's not going to return.
Sure. Yeah, like if they sent an email, that definitely makes sense. I was just more thinking for the actual appointment ones where they share that information.
Yeah. Brendan, what else is coming in, or other folks who want to share questions?
There are other questions in the chat.
Okay.
Hey, Jeremy, it's Gabby from the
Hey.
RHC. Just really quickly, I had put one in there, maybe something regarding financial aid aside from the completing FAFSA.
Yeah, I'm sorry, did you say you have a question about it?
Oh, no, that could be another note reason that could be added to the list.
Gabby, you have a more specific example, perhaps?
Well, I know just in our experience with meeting with students, there's definitely questions regarding completing FAFSA, but then we often have conversations regarding financial aid that includes completing the FAFSA, but it also includes things surrounding scholarships, understanding their package, understanding the difference between subsidized and unsubsidized loan in their package, kind of calculating or recommending how much financial aid to accept based on tuition costs. Whether they be an in-state student, an MSEP student, or a completely out-of-state student. So lots of conversations surrounding financial aid. I guess I could tease that out a little bit more and provide other options for that.
Would like a student financials perhaps capture it better?
Yeah, maybe, because within that too could then relate to questions about Bursar and how to set up a payment plan for the semester, how to understand what their account inquiry is reflecting on what they owe, what they've paid. And I know that that's kind of more in-depth financial aid stuff. And I just want everyone to know that we do refer students to financial aid advisors, and we don't try to fill that role. But I think that could help those note reasons. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm also seeing, as we're keeping up with the chat, can other academic be added back? I'm making a note of that as well.
And in thinking about the ones that we can add, the important part is really if it's ever an area in which you run a report on. So if you ever needed to figure out at what point in time you talked to, you had financial conversations across the past year. So that's kind of a helpful way of thinking of which ones we might want to add.
Okay, and I'm seeing Daniel offering schedule change instead of course drop, something more general. Okay. Okay, CGS, it looks like doesn't have other academic available to them, so we'll check into that.
Hey, Jeremy, this is Brian.
Hey.
I just want to draw attention to a comment in the chat earlier from Jenny Klump about kind of personal notes, remembering a student's vacation or favorite show or something like that, and whether or not, there was an example that suggested maybe that shouldn't go in notes. Maybe you could say a little bit more about your intention there.
Yeah, well, I guess it's not, these aren't black and white determinations. I put it in there largely to bring about the fact that if you feel like it's information that others would be helpful for other audiences, that's great. It's just one of the things to kind of be mindful for. If it's really something that's based on a nugget of information that's based on the relationship you have with the student, that's not to say that you can't put that in there. What we're trying to do is just trying to come up with common guidelines given how the user base will continue to expand. There's no one size fits all for all of this, so I don't want to to demonize anyone who wants to put personal pieces that students have shared with them, just being mindful of how that can be observed by multiple stakeholders in the platform and across campus.
I think an example of that would be for the not returning temporary. Their favorite Netflix shows might not be something that needs to be in that sort of note for when you're pulling those those reports in the future. But that might work for like the freshman advising piece if you were emailing back and forth and things like that came up as icebreakers or different pieces like that.
I mean, you say that now, but what if Ozark doesn't return? You know, I mean,
as it shouldn't.
Easy, Brennan. So I would say that you could also privatize that note. I mean, if it's something that you wanted to keep, that isn't something that would be potentially pertinent to the larger academic community, you can make that, if you click to make a note, you can make it visible for you only, so that when you're going into it, then they see that, or that you can see it. So if you did want to keep that information on Navigate, you can still do that without having a public note.
Thanks, Bo.
Yeah. All right. So for sake of moving us along to additional topics, the good thing about the chat is that Brennan and I are certainly going to comb through that as part of the recording or after the recording to make sure we've got all the good ideas, and then we'll look to make adjustments based on your suggestions. So thanks for that engagement to the point that it's been hard to keep up. So thank you for that. Let's move on to appointment reports from there. So this is where we can put some more detailed information in based on an advising or coaching appointment that you have with a student. So you've got lots of good options to kind of cater this and capture where the conversation was with an actual appointment. Unlike notes, appointment reports aren't visible to the student. So, but it is again visible to the user base in various ways. And so for folks that haven't spent a ton of time with appointment reports in particular, here's a screenshot from a demo from EAB for your reference. So lots of good information in here in terms of meeting time, start time, end time, where the meeting happened, was it about particular courses, and so on and so forth. What we haven't really used in appointment reports as a campus yet are the points up top that where you see the yellow arrows. So we have the option to configure the appointment reports to get some more information. And one of the things that we're really mindful of as we think about this is we want the appointment report to be really, really useful, and we don't want it to be laborious for you. So could we get to a place whereby it's a common expectation that after each advising or coaching appointment, we complete an appointment report? And some of the reasons why that's really important is again, if we think about the persistence action team, the ability for those folks who were working with students and looking through content and Navigate was really made easier and supplemented when we had appointment reports available to us that provided that greater detail. So the thinking is, what ways can we make yes, no radio buttons work for you all to capture things that may be common that would save you from typing them out in an appointment summary? What type of things might be quick open text field that we could put up top? As you can see, the examples up here are, degree discussed, major discussed, current major and recommendations. We can make those look how we want. We can make those 6 radio button options look how we want below. So what we're looking for is some of your suggestions on how do we make the appointment report most efficient for you. So you're spending maybe less time in the appointment summary, using the notes guidelines to fill that out from a narrative standpoint, and maybe spending less time on an appointment report clicking through radio buttons that capture things that you want to note that you talk to the student about. So as you think about that, just a question for us to consider. We've had some good conversations. So good conversations on campus about what might make for good examples for these areas. So for text boxes and checkbox options and the appointment summary box that you saw in the previous slide, we've talked a lot about student barriers to completion. This was pre-COVID as well. So might we think about one of the text boxes being up front, a place where you can quickly put in a student is struggling to pay their upcoming tuition bill, or they lost their job, or they're struggling in a particular course, or they're not feeling like they are making social connections on campus like they would like to. What could we have an open text field here that would allow you to quickly put in something about that, that you have then visually as a tool that wouldn't require you putting everything also into an appointment summary. If you encourage a student to submit a referral, or you submitted a referral for a student, can you capture that here? If you're working with a student on an academic plan and their intended graduation term is X, would it be helpful to capture that here? Student next steps. You left them with a to-do item, and going to the Career Planning and Resource Center was that thing. So next time you meet with the student, would having that information quickly accessible here help that conversation along and go back to the student about what they may have learned from that visit? Checkbox options. There are a lot of different ways that we can kind of conceptualize this. And again, here's a little bit of the challenge of us having conversations around configuration with many different vantage points. One of the things that I thought about, a number of us had good conversations around establishing academic advising learning outcomes a handful of summers ago. And subsequent conversations that I've had with folks have been a lot about how we've struggled to come up with means of assessment of those learning outcomes. So might a checkbox be one of those quick hit ways that we could use to capture how a good conversation has happened with a student around one of these things? So we could limit the checkbox to something like effective communication. You had a conversation about a student around professional email conduct or professional email conduct to you, to be honest. And might that be an opportunity to check that box? If they're talking about struggling interpersonally, things that are going on around their own personal values and how that relates or doesn't relate to maybe their academic pursuits. So might that be an opportunity to note a conversation around self-awareness and so on and so forth around goal achievement, problem solving, and cultural and civic competence, that are all things that we as an advising community kind of rallied around as core learning outcomes in the advising space as we had these good conversations a handful of years ago. Lastly, then, using that appointment summary box is essentially duplicating the type of guidelines that we'd use in a note. It's their narrative space. You can make it your own. The do's and don'ts apply to this space. But as with all of this, we're trying to establish good common guidelines, but knowing full well you can make some of these your own as you see fit. So a related kind of key question then is, what options could we use around text boxes or checkbox options that allow us to capture high value of information that don't make it laborious for you to submit an appointment summary after or an appointment report after meeting with the student? So I'm going to step out of the share screen again, so I can kind of see and keep up with suggestions that are coming in. If anybody wants to take the mic, feel free.
To Laura's question, yes, all of the any of the options that we would add here would be reportable. So once you can run a report on all of your students, and then any of the areas where maybe they had a barrier for a academic related thing, and you'd be able to pull a list of those students very easily.
So I would say I could see value for having some of those kind of buttons where it'd be easy to run a list for students. For some of the other things, if it's not something that I'm looking to target a particular group of students, to maybe send them resources and things, to just have one box where I enter notes is probably the easiest, but maybe having a couple of those buttons, if it's like they could use a career resource, a financial aid resource, because then that's easier to kind of do follow-up on those things. But I don't, because like one of the other examples I thought on the shared screen, it kind of looked like there was like 5 or 6 questions that we were having to answer, and to do that after each appointment for each student, like I'm thinking during registration, like that just sounds really cumbersome. So I feel like if we had a couple of things, that wouldn't be bad if it helps us target more students, but not too many.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I would add that from a configuration standpoint, none of these would be required. So they'll show up, but you're still able to save the report without having to click. So for example, with all the yes, no's, you wouldn't have to click something for all of those if you didn't want to for that.
Thank you.
Gabby, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I put a question in the chat about, and you responded to it about discussing when it's not appropriate to use the advising report, because you had said that the expectation would be after an appointment. So I had put the question in about, because I've seen a lot of advising reports or advising summaries when it's been an email blast to a bunch of students, so every student gets like a blanket email. That's different from having like an advising conversation with students through email, in which case I've also used the appointment summary, because it's pretty much email advising, right? So that's why I just wanted to clarify that I don't know if like an email blast where there's been no conversation with the student is appropriate for an advising summary. I think that's more appropriate for a note.
I would definitely agree with that. And based on what Angie and Bill said in the chat as well, yeah, it sounds like a note is much more appropriate for an email blast sort of piece of communication. But if there's even a brief conversation that constitutes advising, that perhaps that can be a appointment summary.
Other folks have thoughts on how we can make use of these areas of the appointment report where we haven't before?
Hey, Rebecca, it looks like you have your hand up.
Yeah, I have a question regarding like phone calls. So if we're doing outreach phone calls, would they go in then the notes then?
Sure. I would ask any of the other advisors or coaches to jump in from their perspective there.
Just to clarify, the purpose of the phone call was to have an appointment with that student?
No, I'm talking more about outreach. Let's say they're not enrolled for next semester, let's say, and so wanted to kind of get a little bit more like what's going on. Maybe we try to reach out to them via email, haven't gotten a response. So more of like outreach for like retention purposes, or if they haven't met with us throughout the semester, maybe they're at risk or something, they've been flagged, that kind of outreach.
This is Laura. I was gonna say, my initial thought would be like if they just said like it was financial reasons or they're planning to come back in a semester or something, I think that would be a note. But if all of a sudden you end up having a larger conversation and you're talking them through the reentry process and what classes to take or something, then I would put that as an appointment summary.
Sounds good to me.
Yep, me too. I mean, the other way to think about this is maybe less about the guidelines for practice, but more about how these become tools for you and for others to retain information as you have giant advising loads, or you're reaching out to a number of students over the course of a day. That's another way to think about this, is not necessarily what's the best rule that I need to follow, but how do I make this tool most useful for me in my practice, or for others who may be also reaching out to students in a multicultural office or as part of the persistence action team. I'm seeing a question about CGS access to appointment reports.
Yeah, Denise, this should be essentially your normal appointment summary, just the pieces at the top where it says summary details for Annette, and then has all those boxes. That's the piece that's just an example, but the appointment summary below should be the same pieces as what everyone else has access to right now. So this is just an example from a different institution.
Thank you. So if it's a change for one, it's a change for all, so it can be specific to branch campuses.
Correct. So for the advising community, we'd have to have one, but we could separately do a different one for the folks that have the coaching role. So we could have different in that regard, but not by campus or not by school college.
I'm sorry, can you say that again? My kid just walked in.
Sure, no problem. So they can be separate or different by advisor or coach role, but they can't be separate by location or school college.
Well, what are thoughts and reactions to the drafts in front of you around text box options and checkbox options? All right, Jenny, thank you for the text box support. Okay. I think I saw technology as a suggestion earlier too, so I think we can put that in to the text box around barriers, Wi-Fi devices, whatever that might be.
Brian, it looks like you have your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I as much as I appreciate the checkbox options for sort of assessing student progress and learning outcomes, I also feel like there's an opportunity to use those for things that might be action items or things that could drive watch lists and so forth. I'm particularly thinking for pathway advising, a way to indicate that a student has settled on a major, for example, and we could check yes then, and then we can produce a list at the end of the term of students that are ready to move on to a school, college, and other things. I know there's a number of ways that we've talked about doing something like that, but I'm just wondering if there's some checkbox options that could be more situational for specific cases in how we work with students. Because once a student has an appointment and they have demonstrated effective communication, we check that off. Then do we need to keep checking that each additional time that student makes an appointment, or is there a different way that we could more permanently say, okay, this student has achieved this particular proficiency, and not isolated to a particular appointment?
Yeah, no, I like that thought. I think, I'm thinking about career development opportunities as another one that could fit potentially in here, taking the step to do an experiential learning opportunity or something that is about career readiness and career development that we want to make sure that we captured might be another example. Is that similar along the lines of what you're thinking, Brian?
Yeah, essentially creating things that are creating action items for the student rather than an assessment from our end, which, although I agree we should do it, I think is not isolated to a particular appointment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are there other general milestones that we think that we can use the checkbox for that would have some utility?
I was just gonna say, this is Rebecca Reese from the Peck School. As I drop my earbud out of my ear, sorry, getting that back. Okay, I was just gonna say, sorry not to answer your current question, Jeremy, but Brian had me thinking about something, and I think it does relate to milestones. I think one thing that's actually more probably of a wish list item for EAB is that anything that is really important, like, Brian was saying, like, cool, they've picked a major. That important stuff just gets buried. It gets buried in notes. And if there was any way that there was some kind of milestone that could be added in there, but it could be much more drawn up and visible to the eye, like when you have reminders for yourself about a student, something that they need to get to you and you're trying to not forget about it. So I think, like, if we're going to have some kind of milestone idea, I think that also it would be nice if EAB could find a way to make that much more present to our eyes much more easily without having to dig back through, years of notes on that student.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. I mean, just even something as simple as the name pronunciation, or, preferred names, all that kind of stuff. That's something that I always want to be reminded about as soon as I log in to see that student. So if there's something that's kind of more important, that there's a way to highlight that to the top, because all of this stuff is really important, but it's just going to get buried with each subsequent notification that comes in for the student. 5 more progress reports, a couple more notes that we emailed the student, a couple more appointments, and then a year goes by, and like that's just lost now. It's just buried. So again, I know that's a little bit more of a structural issue within EAB, but if there are some things that are important, we just always might want to see those right away. It would be nice, just because the user interface of EAB is admittedly, I think, a little disappointing sometimes for that kind of stuff. If that helps to clarify.
Thank you.
Okay, cool.
And Brennan, correct me if I'm wrong, there's been developments around preferred pronoun usage, right? Or am I misremembering?
Well, earlier someone suggested adding that for the name pronunciation for the note tag or note reasons, but beyond that, no.
Okay.
We did last year pull in preferred name into the system, so that was a switch, but otherwise nothing with pronouns yet.
Okay. All right. We'll continue to think through what might be good checkbox options. Again, it looks like, at least in the chat that I was able to follow, that text boxes are feeling good. And then maybe we can have some additional conversations around checkboxes. I've done some looking around to see how other campuses are using this, but we could also potentially dive deeper and see if we can come up with some other examples and continue those conversations in other spaces. All right. I think as we talk about a common expectation of using an appointment report after an appointment or an in-depth phone conversation or whatever that might be, it becomes increasingly important to the campus stakeholders that we've got this good information captured. We're fully aware that for many of you, it's appointment throughout the course of every day, and the challenge to keep up with that is substantive, and so we want to be mindful of that, which is partially why we're trying to take a lot of the typing out and do more about clicking and quickly moving through a report that's useful for you. I think if you can, or I would encourage you to have conversations within your advising units about a common expectation of using appointment reports after each substantive student contact. And then I think we can also continue that in conversation in ASALC based on how you're having those conversations within your respective units. So for sake of keeping us on track, let's move on and talk about campaigns. All right. So as we have referred to the kind of environmental scan that took place over the course of the fall, Brennan and I reached out to schools and colleges and units and had good conversations with you about how you used appointment campaigns in your respective areas and at what times of the year you did that. And it became pretty clear to us that everybody does two different types of appointment campaigns. They may call them different things that might happen at different times. It may be school college level or it may be individual user, but regardless, there's an effort to drive students to have an appointment in advance of their registration date. And then there's an opportunity to reach out to students to drive them to re-enroll. So it's after their registration date. They have yet to enroll. This is taking the project return format for some folks. But what's really clear is that folks who are driving appointment campaigns are using this kind of registration campaign or a return campaign, and that's common. So I think that's a powerful way that we can talk about this to faculty and to other academic administrators about the ways that we are commonly using appointment campaigns. When Brennan and I have system level meetings, oftentimes there's a lot of sharing out around how X campus is approaching campaigns. And so it's a powerful collective statement for us to be able to say, yep, everybody across the UWM schools and colleges and academic units are doing something to drive appointments in advance of registration and something to keep students enrolled and coming back the next term. As you can imagine, with a lot of that interest, there's also an interest in trying to understand the takeaways or how successful some of those campaigns might have been in getting students into an appointment and other types of metrics that we can use in talking about campaign effectiveness. And so if anybody has gone in to navigate and looked at the campaign tab, what you'll quickly notice is that there's a lot of wonderful personalization of how users are calling campaigns different things. And what we thought about offering up is a naming convention, at least for these two types of campaigns, so a registration or a return campaign, that everyone has a similar format. Then those of us behind the scenes that are developing analysis that crosses schools and colleges and units then have easier access to understanding what those campaigns are and can dive in and understand the kind of the key takeaways from those efforts. So we wanted to see what your thoughts were about the following as a common note naming convention for these two type of appointment campaigns. So leading with either return or registration as the type, the current term, the school, college, or unit doing that appointment campaign, and the advisor if applicable. So in some areas, I know individual advisors are running their own campaigns based on their curated list of students. In other areas, schools and colleges might be grabbing all students eligible to re-enroll and including them all in a collective campaign. So I'll offer an example of a registration campaign for spring 2020 from CGS and Connie Human is administering that campaign as a way for us to then understand what's included in that campaign, and then allowing us to kind of quickly gather that for sake of larger scale analyses. Are there concerns or thoughts or reactions to using this type of a common naming convention for these two types of campaigns? Okay. We'll continue to think about it. I think part of what we will do as a wrap up to today's time is share out the recording, integrate the chat suggestions into future directions, but also identify decision points where we've been able to get to them today in the limited time that we've had together.
Jennifer, it looks like you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just had one question about kind of the history of our campaigns. So as campaigns expire, they still sit there, and you know, the longer you're around, the more you accumulate. So I'm just wondering, you know, for tracking purposes, should we leave them all there forever, or at some point should we delete them? Like what is the protocol for that you would suggest?
Brennan, do you have some thoughts just historically thinking through having that space where all the campaigns have lived, and has there been requests to go back to in any way, shape, or form that would help inform how you would approach this?
So nothing very official. I think it's more of a housekeeping thing for you. So if it's a campaign that you ran very specifically and you know for a fact you'd never have to report on it, I guess that's up to you if you'd like to remove it. It's not going to remove the appointment summaries or anything like that. So you'd still be able to report on all of those to prove that it happened. I would say more importantly than cleaning up campaigns would likely be cleaning up your watch lists, which is where a lot of your campaigns are going to come from. So deleting old watch lists is fantastic and helps a lot, especially for folks that are using the population health dashboard, because everyone's watch lists show up there. It just doesn't say whose name it is. So cleaning those up, I think, is probably a little bit more important. But Jennifer, we can actually inquire with Linda from EAB about that, because I'm sure that's come up with other schools as well, about how to kind of maintain the long list of campaigns, but also if there's a way to kind of archive them and move them to a different area instead.
Any other thoughts or questions about this topic? All right, let's move on. And I will advance the slide for you, Brennan.
Thanks.
Yeah.
All right, so this kind of goes a little bit beyond just Navigate and touches a lot of things, specifically in relation to enrollment and just student communication in general. And so a lot of you have been involved in conversations across campus of who's doing what when, and making sure we're not overlapping messages and making sure the messages are consistent. So across the summer, we've been gathering some information, and before the start of the year, we hope to share out a draft of kind of a communication calendar, if you will, in regards to Navigate specifically and kind of enrollment where it touches. So thinking about the things that can be more centralized in terms of messages sent through Navigate, whether it's enrollment text messages or financial aid information that needs to go out to every student, versus when it's more appropriate for a school or college to do that. We've talked a little bit about that in the past at some of the SWAT meetings, but diving a little bit more into that and having on this date or this week of a semester, this is when this type of message would go out. Kind of what the registrar's office currently does, of they'll send out their enrollment appointments email and then send that out to ACN, making sure that everyone has that. So something along those lines. Similarly, with the text, emails, and pushes. So if there's anything more related to the app, things like that. When certain messages might be more appropriate from advisors and coaches. We've gotten some areas where we know that becomes more important from the advisors as opposed to a campus-wide message. And then compiling some of the enrollment management outreach, similar to what I was talking about with the RO. I've sent out financial aid text messages for some students in the past, and then the Student Success Center does some outreach as well in regards to re-enrollment. So making sure that we've got that clearly documented so that folks know. And looking at it in a month-by-month lens, and then also including any of the campaigns that we might run in there. Helping everyone who's actually doing the work to have a better understanding, but then also helping those that are less connected to it but still need to know for enrollment planning and different things like that a little bit more clearly what's happening in this space. Are there questions or things that you guys would like to see specifically included beyond those? Yeah, Alejandra.
Hi, yeah, I was just wondering, will you be kind of touching base with schools and colleges and seeing what communication plans they already have in place? Because I know we've got campaign appointments, and then we've got emails that we send to students. They're not necessarily, appointment campaigns that we can track, but we still call them campaigns. And then we obviously have encouraging messages and things, whether we send them through text message or just, registration efforts. So I'm just kind of wondering, how are we going to kind of compile all that so there's not duplicate, messages going out?
Sure. A lot of that we did capture when we did our school college visits, but we'll make sure that when we send out a draft we'll start with SWOT, kind of looking to see if there's areas where maybe every college is doing something specific in a certain area, and it's less appropriate for it to be centralized, to do our best, but also knowing there will be a little bit of overlap in certain areas as well.
Okay. And I think Lubar was one of the first schools in college you met with, so it's been a while, and I know we made some updates and are actually updating more now, and so yeah, we can connect.
Yeah. And this definitely wouldn't be prohibitive, but it would just be a way of knowing, okay, maybe I don't need to send this email out because it's taken care of, and it can be one less thing to have to worry about. Okay.
Moving on.
Sounds good. All right, next is everyone's favorite. So I'm talking about the Navigate mobile app. So folks that maybe aren't as familiar, we've had the Navigate mobile app for a couple of years now, and we focused this summer on relaunching it and re-examining some of the ways that we use it. So when we first rolled it out, it didn't have all the features here that we'll talk about in brief, but you're able to download this app as well, even though you're not a student. So if you go to any of your app stores and search for Navigate, it'll have the EAB logo there, and you're able to log in with your UWM single sign-on. You won't see all of the information that an undergraduate student sees, because what happens is it pairs the information that you give the app when you log in with the information that we send to EAB for Navigate. And since we don't send them student information for you, you won't see certain things that would populate for students. But we'll work to, on the microsite, have a more detailed list of the things that are going to show up there for you, or for students. But from a big picture, certain to-do list items like filing financial aid, enrolling in classes, checking for holds, things like that are in the system, and a lot of those have push notifications for them. Different events that happen on campus that are more applicable to every student. So things like, the Exploring Majors Fair, or items like that. Certain fall welcome events in future semesters will be there as well. Tips is something we currently don't have set up yet, but we'll be soliciting some student feedback there of tips from student to student. So other schools use this for best places to study, or favorite food on or off campus, things that are a little bit more socially engaging in some of those. Then the term tools. So similar to how students can schedule an appointment online through Navigate, they can do the same from their mobile app. And so it gives them the same view, just in a mobile way to schedule appointments with you all. It also gives them push notifications for holds. So if they have a new hold that will bar them from registering, that'll pop up. We have a very exhaustive list of campus resources. Most of those are very brief, but pointing the student back to the website and avoiding acronyms when possible. It'll also pull the student's class schedule from pause and show it in the calendar view, and they're able to sync that with their native calendar in their phone as well. And then a newer feature is study buddies. So let's say you're enrolled in anatomy and physiology for a certain section. It'll pull in your class schedule and you're able to raise your hand in a way. And you'll see a list of other students in that class who are using the app that have raised their hand. And so you're able to kind of communicate and form study buddies or study groups if that's something that you're looking to do. So some campuses have had a lot of success with that, but that's a newer tool for us. And then other things that we're looking at, an intake survey, so we'll show that here in a minute, and then quick polls, which we'll talk about in a second as well. Questions about any of those general features? Okay, and I should note for the to-do list, or for the to-do items, most of those were formed from SWOT. We did a couple years ago, we went through and wordsmithed a lot of them and updated some of the items that were suggested from EAB and made them a little bit more UWM specific. All right, so for the intake survey, so this is one of the ways that we can gather information from the student. So each semester, the first time they log in when they download it, and then each subsequent semester, they'll be asked these questions. And they're quick and easy for them to complete. So just asking them whether it's their first term at UWM, what they feel they are, whether they're a first-year student or sophomore, junior, what campus they're attending, which will determine which resources and some of the other push notifications they'll see, and then whether or not they plan to complete their degree here. So since that came out of the pause piece, that'll show up here. And then all these are select all that apply. So similar to some of the other surveys in the past, we'll pull these and share them with the appropriate offices. So some of the newer ones, like access to Wi-Fi and personal computer, are ones that we'll share with the Dean of Students office for assistance with getting technology for fall. Questions about the intake survey at all? Okay. All right, and then getting to Alejandra's question in the chat in relation to quick polls as well. A newer feature that they have is we're able to push a small number of questions each semester to any of the users of the app. We can get a little bit more specific if we wanted to focus on just first-year students or if it needed to be all students. So something we're looking at doing, and part of the communication plan that we're working on will include the quick polls. So with these, there's some examples here of another school and how they've used them. Ones that we're envisioning for our campus for this year would be in mid-September saying, hey, it's been a couple weeks. How are you feeling? Do you need any help? And then allowing students to answer from there. And then the persistence action team could use that to reach out to students directly. We can get them connected with tutoring, different things like that, or send them to the appropriate advisor as well. In relation to the Pride survey, we're likely going to try and move a lot of those, some of those questions here, definitely the more actionable ones, and then hopefully looking to retire the Pride survey, but a formal decision hasn't been made yet on that. So in thinking about quick polls, are there, and knowing that it's mostly for large students, are there ways that you see quick polls being useful for your schools and colleges?
Well, and maybe why folks are thinking about that question, I'll refer to a way that it could have theoretically plugged into some recent campus efforts. So a number of us were around good conversations at the time that we were leaving campus, and came up with what was essentially called kind of a pulse survey. So trying to get a finger on the pulse of where students were with their plans and what challenges they were experiencing. So campus developed a first iteration of this survey, and then after the semester concluded, Pulse 2 essentially kind of went out to get an understanding of what students' future plans were. And that was largely generated and coordinated out of Qualtrics. So quick polls allow us the ability to reach a large number of students who have theoretically adopted the app and get some quick, immediate reaction about things like their plans to return to fall, their plans to come back to UWM, or a decision to stay closer to home. Like we could have theoretically built a quick poll and sent it out to the Navigate app community in a more quicker fashion than the administration that Qualtrics would sometimes allow us to. So back to the question though, that Brennan posed. What are creative approaches to the ways that we can make use of this function? Yeah, and I see Marina in the chat looking at satisfaction post-appointment. That was one of the examples that we included there because many of us have been a part of conversations about in a post-CAT track world, how are we really understanding the student experience after an advising appointment and getting some good feedback about their experience there. Some of us have come up with homegrown Qualtrics and administer those, but this could theoretically be one of those options to use quick polls in this fashion. And we could structure then a frequency that would meet everyone's needs essentially, because what we'd be trying to do is reaching out to a group of students that we would send to EAB, and they would help us then populate what that poll or who that poll would go out to within the app.
And on that note, it would also, and Jeremy, I apologize if you said this while I was typing, for appointment satisfaction pieces, it would be more of at the end of a month, we could send that out to students that have had appointments during that month. It wouldn't be something that we'd be able to do instantaneously or automatically after a specific appointment.
Question about quick polls being tailored for school and college.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the reasons we asked the intake survey about which campus they're on, we'd be able to push a poll based on that. And then additionally, there's features within there for school college more specifically.
Alejandra's suggestion about you're a couple weeks in, how are things going? It's a good suggestion. Because again, the good benefit to this is it does allow us to then connect resources to students who are responding in a particular way towards a particular item within that poll. Like on the slide that was previous, where we're asking students to report out about some of the challenges they might be experiencing. We know then who to point those resources to directly based on their responses. Living on campus, how's that going?
Gwen, to your question there about who sees the responses. So we're able to turn on the permissions for that so that if we, depending on how the direction we decide to go with quick polls, we'd be able to turn those on for either all advisors, or we'd be able to leave it on for administrators, and then we'd be able to pull that list of responses to share with folks. But it would be visible depending on the route we go with the types of questions we want to ask. And they'd be visible on the student's profile. For Gabby's question about individual units, at this point, no, but I do know that it's on EAB's roadmap to make these quick bowls more tailorable for individual users to use. Right now, we still have to send the questions that we want pushed out to EAB, and then they'll do a forced push through the system, but they'd like to get it at some point where it's much more campus-based.
So if we wanted to create a quick poll, we would go through you to then get it to EAB?
Yes, but right now they're having us focus on quick polls that would be for all students or for large cohorts of students.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Shall we move to question 2 on this slide?
Yeah, so are there additional things that you guys would like to see or content that you want to make sure is built into the app? All right. So the last thing on the app that I neglected to mention earlier, in terms of pushing for larger campus adoption, we will be sending out sort of a welcome email to students, encouraging them to download the app, reminding them that it's the best way to schedule appointments with their advisors, but also see their class schedule and things like that. So it'll be a great way for them to do that. So we'll get that out in August. It's also built into the PAW piece for new freshmen, and then we'll do some more targeted campaigns as we see who does and doesn't download it as we go. Okay. All right, so switching gears then, talking about some updates and developments beyond that. We've worked on developing the microsite, so uwm.edu/navigate. There's some faculty, staff, and student resources there. We're working to build that out even more. Eventually, we'd like to have more training materials there and additional pieces. So if there's things that you'd like to see or a training tutorial that would be super helpful, please let us know. Those are things that we'd love to incorporate there. Additionally, we're trying to work with CEDL to get the Canvas API integration in place. So essentially, you'd be able to see certain elements of the gradebook for courses that are using the Canvas gradebook. So you wouldn't be able to see everything by any means, but you'd be able to see submitted grades that are completed. So you wouldn't see an empty gradebook, but you'd see a 95 on whatever test, things like that. So we're working with CEDL on that, and so hoping for a fall rollout for that. Next, syllabus language. Oh, Jennifer, go ahead.
Sorry, with the gradebook thing, just because this is something I've been wishing for a long time, because it's much more helpful when you can see in the moment how the student is performing. So this would be, I'm sorry, just to make sure I understand, this would be in the app, or it would be in Navigate Desktop where we would see it?
It'd be in Navigate Desktop for you to see. Yeah, so it wouldn't pull the student in for the student, it would pull in for the advisors and coaches to see.
And where in that, where in Navigate will it go? Where will it live in Navigate?
Yeah, let me pull up I think it's an additional tab that would pop up.
Okay.
Let me double check.
So basically, we would just see any grades that were submitted by the instructor as being completed, but we wouldn't really be able to see, let's say, if a student has not, like if a student has missed 3 assignments or something, we wouldn't see it unless maybe the instructor had it in there as zeros or something along those lines?
That's correct. From our understanding and what we've seen from the demo, you'd only see it once a grade had been entered for it.
Okay.
And this would show up under the class info tab. It would show up under assignments this term, so it would pull in there and outline those.
Okay, so it's not going to be part of the history
Correct, because it's
Okay.
a evolving data point and not just a direct report.
Okay, thank you.
Well, and to maybe add some more context as to why we even get to have this conversation right now, I think when we presented to the department chairs in January, they were really interested in any type of integration between the two platforms. And as we've had conversations with our EAB rep, we've been constantly asking every time we got together about where our developments around making the two platforms talk. And so because of our persistence, if you will, and the fact that, I think we have some leverage to make changes within the platform with EAB, because now we have the system behind us. We are one of the first campuses to really be able to play with any type of integration with Canvas. So I think it's new for both platforms and playing together in the same space. So it's going to be evolving, but the fact that it's another indicator that we can see where students at any given point in time is pretty helpful. I'm thinking about how informative this would be for persistence action team outreach, being able to really see where students are across those courses, assuming the grade book is being utilized. That adds a lot of good seasoning to understanding where a student is, in addition to things like progress reports.
Definitely. All right, so the next piece, syllabus language. So we work to kind of craft some generic syllabus language that instructors can put in relation to Navigate and progress reports in particular, saying that their class may be using progress reports, what that means for their course, and that sort of thing. So we'll either throw that in the chat or we'll include that in the follow-up email that we'll send out with what that specific syllabus language will look like. Next, a lot of different schools have been using faculty appointments and office hours scheduling within Navigate, so that's something that UWM is hoping to do for fall. So essentially, instead for the location would just be instructor's office or instructor's virtual office for this semester, and then we'll have trainings for instructors if they want to use this for scheduling for themselves for appointments. And so it would be potentially getting a lot more faculty involvement there. And so look for more information about that as we move forward. Next, predictive model updates. So every so often, EAB likes to update the model and refresh it as they've got more data. You'll remember they look back about 10 years in our historical data, and so making sure that they're pulling in the most recent data as well to keep that up to date. And then looking at it from a UW system standpoint, making sure that we're all on a consistent model. So there's different models between persistence from term to term and persistence to graduation. And so UW system has been pushing to get everyone on the same model there. And so once we have an update on reconfiguration of our model, we'll let you know and let you know how that may have shifted anything. They're generally pretty good about sharing a report of what that looks like. Yeah, Brian.
Thanks, late on the mouse here. Have there been any conversations about allowing us access to the data that is entered into Navigate alone? So that is to say, right now they have a one direction pull from our student information system, but there's increasingly things that we enter into Navigate that it would be great to have back to be able to do localized data reporting on. So has there been any discussion about allowing us access to a data pull back from Navigate?
Do you mean about the predictive model in particular, or in general?
No, I mean, I'm aware that predictive model is intellectual property that they're not going to give to us, other than they're not going to tell us how they come about it. But it'd be nice to have, if we are doing check boxes to say the student has decided on a major, it'd be great to be able to pull that into a report that could rejoin other pause data in a OBIEE or Power BI sort of situation.
Yeah, I know that there are some level of APIs that we can do back to different systems. I've shared some of that information with UWITS, and I haven't heard much back from them. So that's an area that I can definitely follow up on.
Okay, yeah, that would be, I think, super helpful particularly as we want to study not just their predictive model, which I understand is their own thing, but it'd be great to have some of these data elements coming back to us.
For sure. Yeah, thank you for bringing that back up. I'll make sure to follow up with you. It's there.
Will do.
All right. And then moving forward, we'd also like to make sure that we're bringing more and more offices in for the coordinated care network. So making sure that every office has some level and appropriate level of access and representation here for, access to student information, but also providing student information through notes and different things like that. And then finally here, you'll see what EAB is calling V2 reporting. So if you've used the reporting tab in the last couple of weeks, you'll notice that it looks a lot different. And so essentially what they've done is they've compiled a lot of the different reports into smaller buckets. So essentially, if you were to pull the appointment summaries report, you would get a lot more information in one spreadsheet. In the past, we've complained to them a lot about how I have to run this report to get this set of information, but if I run this report, I get a very different but somewhat overlapping set. So this set of reports, when you pull an Excel spreadsheet, it's going to give you a lot more options of things that you can export in relation to that. So it's a little bit more consistent as well. And so I've liked them so far, but they're definitely there for you to play with.
Okay. Well, let's move into the question, answer, and discussion. And maybe the first part of that is asking, are there other questions about the updates that Brennan shared? I think one other just piece of context about the syllabus language, that's a request to have that language included on syllabi that's moved to dev that hasn't been confirmed yet. But we thought as we continue to try to get to normalize navigate as something that the students recognize the moment that they're here, the syllabus felt like a really good place to plug that in. And then also in a roundabout way, we hope that instructors then get more aware of what the platform is about and how they can utilize things like progress reports to help students be more successful. Other questions or comments about the updates? Thank you, Margaret. All right, let's move on then. One of the things that we thought might spur a bit of a discussion is an interest in any service type changes that exist within the platform. There are a couple examples that are in there now that are utilized in things like appointment reports in other areas. So that will kind of open the floor to reactions to that. And then also what other training, support, content might be helpful. As we go back 90 minutes ago, we had talked about this not being the space we had really kind of conceptualized when we thought about pulling together as a community, if you will. Are there other ways that we can support your efforts and more frequency to these type of spaces or targeted content in particular areas that would be really helpful? And then lastly, are there any other questions, comments, or general concerns that anyone has about the platform itself or configuration, functionality, and so on and so forth? So Susan asked a question about grad students. And I guess the easiest way for me to respond to this is the same way I was asked to respond to it in January, is ask the provost, because the reality is there is a grad version of the Navigate platform. And at this point in time, we haven't decided to make an institutional commitment for reasons I'm obviously haven't been privy to, but just know that side of the platform exists, and it's just a step we haven't taken as a campus yet.
And the graduate school as a whole is aware, but yeah, definitely keep asking if it's an area of interest.
So Kate, as you're asking about report writing, are you talking about taking reports extracted from Navigate and then making it consumable to different audiences, or understanding reports that exist within the report tab? Can you help clarify that?
Yeah, that would be all of the above. And also if we just had some, tips on, these are, if you want to answer question X, these are the things you search for. These are, because what, we've talked about this, where we find inconsistencies between stuff we pull from OB or the data warehouse and Navigate. So if we can refine what we know out of Navigate and refine how we're asking the questions so that we more closely match what we get in OB or the data warehouse, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, and then please, as you discover those discrepancies, let us know.
Okay.
So that we can then take that back to either EAB or to folks working in OB and other spaces to make sure we've got the most accurate look.
One other thing I would add to that, we do a fair amount of analysis around those soft data points that we have around at-risk interventions, whether somebody is first gen or they've got a bursar hold or whatever. Right now, when we run a report, those load into one cell. And if we could find a way to put that data in individual cells so we could sort by students who are first gen. And right now we have to go in and create, move things into individual cells. So that would be great if we could, that would help if it would export into individual cells.
Great.
I agree. Thanks, Kate.
Well, then, Kate, you also bring up a great point for us to make use of this space now too. What wish list items do you have for the platform that we can then take back? Yeah, Jennifer?
I had mentioned this to Brennan earlier this week, but I think especially given the work we're doing now remotely, if we could have something in terms of an appointment mode. We have this service type where the student can indicate, what the purpose is for their meeting. But if we could also have something where we could set up our modes of service as advisors, so we could indicate, whether we're available for, Teams video conferencing, phone appointments, email appointments, in person. I think that would be really, really helpful as we go forward. And I don't know if that's something we can do. I would think that a lot of campuses would like that right now. So I don't know if that's on the radar screen for EAB or not.
Yeah, so it's definitely come up. And I think the way you're talking about it, Jennifer, in terms of like another field that dictates mode as opposed to changing the location or changing the service type makes the most sense. Other campuses that have more rules around appointment length, it's been easier for them to just switch everything to say online. For us, a lot of our schools and colleges offer different appointments. We've got folks that do 30, 45, 45, and there's a couple appointment types that do 15-minute appointments. And so that becomes a lot more difficult and in some ways not possible to set up within the system to rename all those as online, if that makes sense.
Brennan, this is Alberto. Piggybacking a little bit on Kate's comment about the use of reporting tools. I guess I'm curious as to, what in the form of professional development in the near future can be offered to allow for, across the board, everyone to know how those reporting tools can be best utilized in everyone's department and units. So I think there's a lot of great tools. I just think there might be inconsistency as how people are utilizing those tools. and maybe offering from the EAP perspective, academic advising, umbrella. What are some of the big nuggets in there that can be utilized to analyze the different campaigns, the different communities of students, like Kate said, first generation, and really dissect and utilize those tools as they're intended, right? For versus, they're there, but folks might not know how to best, take advantage of them.
So more of what types of reports should you be running, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, what will be beneficial to one's work and to maximize the tool and maximize what you can do to impact the life of a student and the work that folks are doing.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm thinking, there's a couple of different ways that we can move forward with this. One, we could essentially develop a series of additional conversations around targeted topics. We could talk about the version 2 reports as one iteration of that. We could talk about the population health dashboard as part of that series as well. But for either one of those approaches, the thinking through what is kind of the key research question that you're trying to answer, in my experience, has been kind of a start point. So what are you trying to investigate? How can you find answers to that question, or close to his answers to those questions within the platform? And that's been illustrative to me around how you can really actually go with the reports that are there, as opposed to just jumping into a particular report and clicking around and seeing what's there. So it's really letting the inquiry drive how you construct the reports and make use of some of the reporting functions has been pretty helpful for me, and I think could get cooked into whatever additional professional developments folks are interested in.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. What else?
Or other things that you were hoping that we'd address today? Yeah, Gabby?
Not sure if this is the space to maybe talk about this question, but I'm going to go for it anyway. There's been times on Navigate when we're running a list, for example, of students assigned to us who are on academic probation. And there's been several times where I know that there are a couple of students of mine who are on probation and whose names come to mind, but are missing from that list. There's been some data inconsistencies or things not crossing over from pause, or I'm not quite sure what the issue is, and it's technology, right? It's never probably going to be completely perfect, but I'm just curious if anyone else has ever experienced anything like that, about students missing from lists or lists just not running correctly. Just curious if anybody else has experienced that and what we might be able to do to kind of remedy that.
Okay, well, if folks do have that experience, I'll go back to the previous request around data integrity is please let us know so we can look behind the scenes and get a report cleaned up or demystify what you're seeing, so it's as accurate as possible.
And maybe I'm the only one who's experienced that, in which case, awesome.
No, definitely. There's definitely been cases like that, but like Jeremy said, make sure you share those with us so we can report them with the AB.
Okay, any other wants or needs or things you'd like to learn more about? I'm hearing reports and takeaways. Yeah, Sarah.
Hi, I'm not sure if this is just an issue within our department, so I thought I'd ask just to be safe. So in SSS, we're moving more to like a holistic coaching model. So in Navigate, we'd like to use the coaching function to report on our appointments. And we can select coaching in the care unit. We can select student support services and location. But when we click for the service, it's currently blank for us. And I don't know if other coaches have that issue or if that may just be our department. So it prevents us from saving that message. Right now, we have to put it in advising. So I'm just wondering if that's maybe just an issue with SSS or we have to have certain services assigned to us.
Sarah, I'm thinking that's probably in how we currently have it set up. So I can take a look and then I'll follow up with you and demand about that. My guess is that I just have some buttons that I forgot to click somewhere. So
okay, no worries. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. To a point that came up in the chat, Microsoft Teams was added, I think it was either this week or last week, as an appointment reason. So you can now include that within your availability. If you find that you're not able to add that when you go to your availability, let me know. I had to turn it on by each school college and location. So there's a chance that I could have missed you. So please let me know if I did. This won't add the link to it, but it'll add the option for students to schedule directly as that instead of a phone appointment. I believe students should now be able to see that as well once it's added to your availability.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for spending a good chunk of time with us this afternoon. We'll likely be following up with you in some way, shape, or form to see how well you felt this went, given some of the constraints that we were under. We appreciate the feedback, the suggestions, and we'll certainly be following up with a lot of based on the content that you provided around some of our decision points and questions of configuration. We'll hope that it's obvious that you feel comfortable sending either Brennan or I or the navigate-support.uwm.edu that goes to both of us. Questions, comments, or concerns as you have them, or I'm hearing this from students, or I'm hearing this from groups of advisors who are really interested in this functionality that we're not seeing. Like, please send us your headaches and your critiques, because we're happy to move them on to EAB and find solutions to make it most successful and most operational for you. Brennan, closing comments?
Nope, I think that's it.
Okay. Well, as soon as we all leave, a report will start to get generated and it will live in this space, so you can access that. We'll also communicate that out with the further details that I just referred to those that were unable to attend us, but for the 50+ strong that were able to do so, we appreciate your time and your engagement, and be well.
Thank you, guys. Great session.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Take care.
You too.
Good job.
Thanks.